Well, Bula! How are you, everybody? Thanks for being here. It's great to meet you, to see you. Some of you I've seen before, some of you I see all the time. It's good to see some students here. Don't roll your eyes at me. My name is Lisa Doskocil. I teach anthropology for CCC, and I'm really excited to be here tonight to share with you some of the exciting work that we're doing at CCC, because not only is this about a trip to Fiji, of course, but this is to share with you some information about our upcoming field school that we're creating in Fiji. So this is just going to be a continuous summer adventure for us to grow constantly and to get better and to have more fun with it. But I start off by saying Bula, because that is how you say hello, Bula Vanaka. Welcome. Thank you for joining me this evening. I hope you'll share. I tried to make this a little less like your Aunt Pat's slideshow of her trip over the summer, but you know, it has a little element of that. I'm also not a photographer. I am an anthropologist, so bear with the photography, please. I tried to clean them up a little bit for you. I thought, you know, at first when I was presented with this, I would just come in here and show Moana. I figured that was a good way to start it. Everybody in Fiji loves Moana. They're so proud of that film. So I'll spare you the songs, though. I was going to sing a little bit. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll start off with a little anecdote about cannibalism. But then I thought, well, that might not be particularly tasteful, so I won't do that. Bump. Oh, boo. Oh, well, I try. So I do want to share with you just some of the cultural experience in Fiji that I've had and that we're trying to promote for our students. We are definitely interested. If anybody wants to come with me over the next course of the next few years, please talk to me after class. See, I'm already teaching. Sorry about that. This evening or anytime, absolutely. I would love to share some more information. But let's go ahead and get started, because the first thing I find, a lot of people are like, Fiji, where is that? In this giant world, where do we even find Fiji? And you'll see it's this tiny little area over here. Depending on who you talk to and probably where the tide is at that time, there's between 200 and 300 different islands. You do tend to watch them disappear as the tide comes in, so it's very interesting. But in Fiji itself, there are many islands with many diverse peoples there, and I'm going to share just a taste of some of that cultural experience. The majority of the time in our field school will be spent here in Viti Levu, that's the main island. We're going to be working with the Fiji Museum down here in Suva. We can take excursions to Banga as well as Kadavu Island, where we will be experiencing living with various villages, harvesting food, learning the language, all of that real cultural immersion piece. So that's all part of the excitement. But there's still so much to see. And as I start talking a little bit more about the varying cultures there, I will also bring up the Chinese immigrants to this region, and they tend to live up here in Savu Savu. So that way you just kind of have a place set in mind as to where you see these groups. But, I mean, who wouldn't want to go there? Pretty nice. Despite the fact that there are hundreds of things that'll kill you, and most of them in that water, it's a pretty amazing place to go. I do highly recommend it, even if you don't come as part of our field school, if you visit at some point. Come on in. Hi. You missed it. We sang all the songs from Moana already. Come on in. Have a seat. Oh, not at all. There we go. Is that all right? Yeah, that makes the color pop a little bit more. All right, so pretty beautiful. This is from the island of Kadavu, and we would be staying in 3 different villages on this island, so I highly recommend it. This is the sunset. It really doesn't do it justice. Like I mentioned, I'm not a photographer, but it's an incredible place to be. And as you're leaving this desert land of ours to go to this tropical oasis, you definitely can relate to the way the culture has just been imbued with all of these elements of both danger and beauty, right? Between the rush of the ocean, you can hear it, the ocean crashing against the coral reefs constantly. and of course all those things that can kill you that I mentioned. But it's also a land of rolling hills, mountains, jungles, you name it. This is one of the locations. This is on Benga Island, where we can do a village visit, and you'll see individuals climbing coconut trees. They'll teach you how to harvest them and how to actually break into them, which is always fun and entertaining. So you can see it's a beautiful place. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk a little bit about the indigenous population first. They make up a little bit more than 50% of the population of Fiji. We also have a very large Indian population, as well as Chinese cultural groups that have moved in recent years. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about those. But if you get a chance to jump into a waterfall, I highly recommend it. All right, so going back in our history, about 3,500 years ago is when the first people, the Lapita people, came from Taiwan and started to settle in the Fiji area. And as you can see, according to this chart, it just kind of goes through time to show you where these areas and in what order they were settled in. Very long ago, you can still find the Lapita pottery in various areas in Fiji. Part of our program would be learning how to make this pottery. I have a potter who has been making it for generations in her family, and so we'll be making that pottery as well. So this is a long history. It goes back very far, 1,500 years before present. So we first had the Lapita people, and then eventually we had the Melanesians, who also came into these areas, to these islands, and mixed with all of the locals. So it's a nice blend over time. They came, as you saw in Moana, on those big, beautiful ships that she was sailing. They're called drua. And at the Fiji Museum, this is the very first thing you walk in and see are two giant drua that take up the entire space. They're incredible and very ancient and lined with shells and shark's teeth and you name it, all sorts of decorations on these pieces. The museum works very hard in preserving it for longevity. Even though they have no air conditioning, they are open to the elements pretty frequently, and their collections department could use a little love, and that's really what we're going there for, is to help them relocate and preserve their artifacts for longevity. These are the oars of their long ago ancestors. We've taken tours behind the scenes at the cultural, or in the Cultural Collections Center, and this is what it looks like. It's cram-packed, full of materials and artifacts that have been there for hundreds of years. And that's really what a lot of our work will be in our field school. But part of the beauty of Fiji is, of course, being a part of the living culture, not necessarily just the past and the elements of that, and we'll get into some of it in a minute, but how it still is alive and how they preserve it. Because while it is a very widely known location for romantic getaways, honeymoons, and things like that, it is a powerful statement that we're here, we're staying, and this is our celebration of who we are. And so part of that is the meke. And this one is probably a more calm type of meke dance. Usually you'll see mekes where they are swinging spears and mimicking, slaying one another. They're very passionate in the meke dances, jumping and screaming and yelling, but a celebration of their identity and what's brought them to this place at this time. Also significant in the traditional Fijian cultures, the tabua, which are whale's teeth. This was seen as money. This was, depending on how many whale's teeth you had, it was a way of identifying yourself as being a ratu, or a chief in that community. It was a powerful symbol. And in the origin story of cannibalism, I am going to talk about cannibalism in the history, right? There are a lot of mixed feelings about that significant piece of their past. But the origin, the original story where we think cannibalism came from, consisted of that on one particular island there was a ratu, his wife, and his daughters. And his daughters came of marriageable age, but there were no men that they could marry. So the Ratu, in his wisdom, decided, well, hey, I'll just kill my wife and I'll marry my daughters. And there we go, problem solved. But at the same time that he's contemplating this action, a young man washes ashore. And the women find him, and of course, the wife of the Ratu is like, hey, I don't have to die. This is a good thing, right? So they rescue him, they heal him, they bring him back from the brink of death. And the Ratu says to the young man, well, you need to prove to me that you're worthy of my daughters. I don't even know who you are. And so as the story goes, the young man decided he was going to get some tabua, and that was actually his name too. So he found a whale that had died, and he was collecting the tabua from the whale, and in the process, accidentally knocked out a few of his own teeth. And he thought, hey, I'll use this to my advantage. And so what he did is he took the tabua back to the Ratu, and he said, you know what? I planted my teeth. I planted my teeth in the ground, and look what I did. I made them so much bigger. This is my power. This is the power that I have. Don't you want your daughters to be able to share in my power and ability? And everyone was stunned that he was able to, as they thought, make his own teeth multiply in size to that degree. So the Ratu gave his approval. The young man was allowed to marry his daughters, but there was a catch to that. Anyone else who ever came ashore, any other strangers who ever were to land on that island, they were going to be eaten, just so that they couldn't pull the wool over his eyes again. He wasn't going to be fooled a second time. And so that supposedly is the story of the origin of cannibalism in the Fiji Islands. But the chiefs were known to exchange, the Ratus were to exchange these tabua as symbols of their respect, as ways of identifying who is in power, who's the head of this village. Within cannibalism, and I do apologize, this might be a little difficult to see, but it's on display in the Fiji Museum, and it highlights the significance of cannibalism. Because within this society, traditionally, the reason why we use the term the raw and the cooked, the raw were the women. Women were often exchanged. This is a very highly patriarchal society. And so women were often exchanged as gifts, as ways of demonstrating trust or reliability or power, and not often looked on as much else. If it was not for a woman who was the raw, the cooked was the cannibal, or was the victim of the cannibals, I should say. And so this is the individual who would be shared amongst the village, and as a demonstration of power and control. So this is definitely part of the history of Fiji. Depending on where you go, there is some contention on this history, of course, because the majority of the religion in Fiji is Christian, and there's some shame attached to their background. There's shame attached to this history, and unfortunately, that's a factor of what we need to consider as cultural anthropologists working in Fiji, because what we're doing is we're trying to, in one way, interpret this information as a significant piece of their cultural identity and their history. And because of that shame, we find a lot of sites are actually being destroyed, or they refuse to take care of them, they refuse to value them or preserve them, specifically because they want to forget this part of their history. So it's definitely a part of the work that we have set in store for us, is to try and preserve these sites and to educate the community that while this is your past, it doesn't necessarily mean it's your present, right? So the preservation of cultural identity. At the same time, it also depends on who you speak to, because there is wide acceptance and understanding that there was a lot of cannibalism in the past. It's just part of human history. I don't think most of us, when we truly know what happened in our own historic backyards, are particularly pleased with what's happened there. It's a reality of lived experience. And so a friend of mine, Malachi, and I were talking, and we were just talking about the tourist industry, how many tourists come to these villages to see the kids and have them sing for them and things like that. And I was asking him how his kids were taking it, and he said, well, my son was doing all right with it until one of the tourists came up and pinched his cheeks. And ever since then, he's been biting them. But he said, But that's okay because my wife is from one of the cannibal tribes, so, that's just in his blood. If you're going to explain it, that works too. So these are just factors that we need to consider, and that's why I brought my cannibal fork for you. You're welcome to come up and see it at the end of the presentation. The cannibal fork was a significant and sacred piece, an element of this cannibalistic history, because the priests and the ratus were sacred beings. They were gods in the eyes of the villagers and the communities. And so what they touched with their hands and what they touched with their lips had to be pure. It had to be clean. We're talking about the origin of the word taboo coming from this culture. So recognition of the fact that whatever they do has to be purified. And so the reason that we have the cannibal forks, and as you see them up here in this image, is to allow the ratus and the priests to eat of the flesh without it contaminating their lips or their hands. So the idea was you would put that entirely in your mouth, and that way your lips don't touch the flesh of the other human being. Cannibalism is a touchy subject, but when you think about the significance of this neck of the woods, so to speak, there's very few animals that you can hunt. If you're looking for a good protein source, you have fish and not much else unless you want to eat bats or mongoose. So this would have been a good way to get protein in a village, in a community that really had little access otherwise. So just ways that we can think about it reflexively. And you do see elements of this long history throughout the museum and the museum exhibits. In their collection center, many of the weapons that were used were actually encased in human bones. Here you see various staffs that have the handle as a human bone. Here, these are neck breakers. You can imagine how they work. I don't think I need to demonstrate that for you, but definitely a facet of their history that we can't forget, that we can't lose, if the cultural protection and longevity is something that matters to us. And looking at the weapons, you can see that the violence was a significant factor in their history. So what you're seeing here is what we might consider to be more like a sword, not quite a spear, but it is completely lined all the way around with shark's teeth. And this is actually a common style of weapon that was used at that time, if you didn't need the neck breaker, so to speak. We're talking about the ritualistic purpose of violence in these societies. But that's not the case anymore, so it's okay. Don't worry, you'll be fine. It's a beautiful place. The people are wonderful and welcoming, very kind and generous. I can assure you our students will be safe from that. I don't know so much about the jellyfish, but at least cannibalism is a facet of the past. We do tend to see the bures as you drive through the country, and as you visit various villages, they'll all pretty much have one. And these were meeting houses. This is the traditional design. I was talking to one of the ratus in the village I stayed at, and he said that is the style that will outlast the cyclones or the hurricanes that they experience in Fiji, which they get them pretty bad out there too. There was one that completely annihilated an entire village just 2 years ago. Here you can see someone climbing up for coconuts. If you'd like to try it, you're welcome to. I can't quite hop like that, but maybe you can do it. I don't know. We'll see. So they move very fast climbing up and down those trees. It's kind of frightening to watch. And of course, there's lots of good fishing that you can do while you're out in Fiji too. We ate pretty darn well out there. The villages themselves, this is one of the villages I stayed in. This was the church. You'll find all sorts of different religions. In one small village that I stayed in, there were 8 different Christian sects, different faiths in that one village. So it's pretty amazing how widespread religion is. And that, of course, ties into the early push to move missionaries into that area. You know, a few went in, they were eaten, of course. But after a while, maybe they lost the taste for missionaries. And eventually, after many years, they converted to Christianity. And in case you're wondering, the Tree of Knowledge is located in Fiji. Might have thought it was in the Garden of Eden, but it's actually in Fiji. So I found it for you. Here you have one of the traditional crafts. These mats are the carpet of Fiji. You won't find rugs at all. Too many bugs and ants and sand getting everywhere. But you do find, this is a wonderful woman. She's 97 years old, still weaving those darn mats. I tried. I could barely get a basket. It's definitely going to take me a little extra practice. But here are some women that I was trying to weave with as well. We were preparing the materials to make those rugs or those mats, and they're everywhere. Yagona is pretty significant if you're not familiar with kava. The Yagona bowl, the Yagona drink is something that our students will definitely have to experience. I had to experience plenty. This is what it actually looks like. You've got the roots. This is all the root that you have. So you have these beautiful bushy plants, but what you really want to get for the good kava, for the good Yagona, is the root. And they wrap it up. And these are the sevu sevu. So these are the gifts that you provide the ratus when you're visiting the villages. So you can imagine I was traipsing throughout Fiji with these long, they were about this long, strapped to my shoulder. Everyone appreciated seeing it though. Everyone wanted to see that kava. So that's significant. It looks like this, and it tastes a little bit the same as it looks. It's like a minty mud, I guess is the best way that I can describe it. It will make your mouth numb, and this is described as the Fiji alcohol, or the Fiji beer. Everybody gets together on regular occasions if it's just after work and you're just having a low-key evening, or if you have something to celebrate. Any excuse for kava is a good excuse. So we got together quite a bit, as you can see. We had a lot of kava. I brought my kava bowl. It's not as traditional as these other ones here. It's a little more ornate, but definitely it's something that you'll have to become acquainted with in some way. So those of us here in the United States are familiar with kava because you can actually get it in a capsule. And I highly recommend it for anxiety if you just need to kind of remove the edge of your anxiousness. It's wonderful. It doesn't do anything to your mind. You're still able to function, but you just find that your nerves are just a little calmer. I highly recommend it. But with kava, there's a whole ritual involved in it. Women cannot present kava. And so every village that I went to, I had to have a man present the kava to the ratu for me. I was not allowed to offer it to him as a woman. And there's a ritual. They say prayers around the kava and accepting it. There's the traditional grinding of the kava, which you can kind of see over here. He's grinding it up, and then we mix it in with some of the pure water. So that Fiji water that you buy in the store, that's the same that they get out of the pipes in the villages, not the cities. Don't drink the water in the cities, but in the villages off to the side. And then the rest of the night is just full of singing, song, constant song, and sometimes a little dance. If you're lucky, maybe you can avoid dancing with the ratu. I wasn't so lucky. There's also something that they like to do to white travelers that's called white sugar, where they require you to serve everyone the kava. So it's just something to experience. Very unique, wonderful evening. So within the traditional kava ceremonies, with the song happening all night long, you basically would be singing and hearing this music and laughter until about 4 a.m., just when the roosters start to crow. So don't plan on sleeping at all. But it's beautiful. Everywhere you go in Fiji, there's music everywhere. Here's just a few other photographs. Again, I told you I was trying not to make it like your Aunt Pat's summer trip, but it's a beautiful place. So this is the flight out to Kadavu. There is a boat for those of us who don't want to fly in these smaller planes, and I'll have to say I'm glad I survived, and I'll be happy if I don't have to get in another one, because it's pretty rough flying over there. But this is what you see coming into Kadavu Island. And this is one of the villages that I stayed in. This was right next to the church that I showed you before. And one of the more powerful things that, speaking with the Ratus and some of the villagers, that really hit me the most was just how impassioned they are about the effects of climate change. They all wanted to talk about it. Because while it might not feel as pressing, although I think we will feel it this summer in particular, but while it might not feel as pressing, these are the trees that are being lost because of the change in the tide and the violence of the storms, and they really want to spread that knowledge that climate change is affecting them drastically. This was one of the community centers, so while I showed you the bore, the traditional design, this is one that one village is trying to build for our students so that they can come and stay there. We will be living in the homes of the villagers, but that is where meals are had, where the kava ceremonies are had, a little bit of everything going on in there. And then this is one of our village communities. You have the Ratu right here in the front, and then the ladies who take very good care of us as we go out to Fiji. Just some other things, we have lots of different activities that we're hoping our students can experience between snorkeling and kayaking, hiking, you name it. This is the view. It's not so bad. But you might have noticed that some of the houses are a little bit different. You have some on the mainland in Viti Levu that are more concrete, more like the homes that we would see around here. And then you have some that are still made out of the corrugated tin. Definitely a lot of momentum happening in Fiji to try and build stronger structures for their homes because, of course, a big storm would do a lot of damage in these communities. This is one of our meeting houses where we would stay. And this is the rooster that'll wake you up bright and early because he lives on the roof, basically. So after you've had that long night of singing songs in the kava ceremony and ritual, you're going to have this guy right there as soon as it ends, checking you out, making sure you're behaving yourself. And this is the view of the village. And this is on the island of Kadavu, where we'll be staying. This is the view from one of the churches. And what is significant is we kayak into this village, hike straight up the side of a mountain, basically. There's a nice set of stairs, but they're really awkwardly placed, so it takes work. And they moved the entire village to the top of this hillside because too many fevers and illnesses swept through the village when they were down lower. Up here, they have fresher air, and so they don't get sick as much. They lost a lot of lives with some of the diseases coming through. But there are other cultures here to keep in mind, right? So Chinese culture, one of the significant pieces of this trip, this venture that we're hoping to create for CCC students is to work with a cultural festival. So every month the Fiji Museum has a cultural celebration of a different cultural group where they come and they have performers and dancers and a lot of crafts and things that are hands-on to really help expand the knowledge of these cultural groups. And so this is one thing that we would be working with. So these individuals here are dancers, and they performed a dance to celebrate the needlework that goes into this. This isn't like a plastic, as we would expect maybe from Western culture. These are all hand-stitched designs on here, and they performed a dance to celebrate that for all of us. So beautiful, ornate costumes. Here you have a musician, she's pretty well known apparently, and beautiful voice, so lots of variety in what you'll get to experience along this trip. And then we had another dancer, which, if you'll permit, I'll share some of this video with you. while Fiji is a country full of vibrance and cultures, one of the fascinating things is that through their long history, they really do live in harmony together. You hear every language. There are tourists from all over the world. And despite a few coups back in the 80s and 90s, things are pretty smooth, and the relationships between these cultural groups are powerful and strong, and there's respect there, which is wonderful. So this is just a reflection of some of our connections with the Chinese cultural groups that we'll be working with. But also in Fiji, you do have that colonial element. This is the Grand Pacific. It's a wonderful place. It's beautiful. It definitely has that colonial history. Queen Elizabeth actually visited there when she was younger. And so during the late 1800s, despite the fact that England really wasn't seeing how they would prosper from it, they did officially colonize Fiji. But what they decided to do when they colonized this area is they were so impressed with the locals and the way that they held themselves and portrayed themselves. They found them to be very respectable, very regal in the way they held themselves. So instead of enslaving the local Fijian populations, as we tend to see in most colonial nations, instead of doing that, they brought a lot of indentured servants from India. And so there is a very large Hindu population. There's about 40% of the population of Fiji practices Hinduism. And this is one of the temples that we'll be visiting. But you do see a lot of that diversity. And when I was at the temple most recently, they had a fire festival. And there are some communities in Fiji that are of Hindu practice, and they do fire walking. So you have two different types of fire walking you can see in Fiji. There's one group from Banga Island that does fire walking, and then there's also a Hindu community that has the ritual of fire walking once a year. So different ways of celebrating those cultural diversity. But the music is always there, whether it's one group celebrating puja on Sundays or Saturdays to another group singing their kava songs or just singing after a rugby match. There's always some music happening. I don't know how the entire country could be filled with so many talented musicians, but it is. And so this is an image of the Fiji Museum. And I just want to say Vinaka Vakalevu. That is thank you very much to our friends at the Fiji Museum, and in particular the villages that we'll be staying at, Batalea and Lagalevu, which is in Kadavu. These are villages that we are planning on spending a week with and really getting to know them every summer. And just a little more fun for you. If you don't like boats, this probably isn't a good place for you. There's a lot of boat riding in order to get anywhere, but it's worth it, and it's beautiful. And I just wanted to end here. You can actually you do see people enjoy and joke about the cannibalism. It's not necessarily a taboo subject everywhere. Mothemara Vakalela, that means thank you, and until we meet again. And one of the ways that I wanted to kind of just wrap up this talk today, I will leave time for questions, but I wanted to share with you a song that you will hear quite frequently throughout Fiji. I don't know how loud it's going to be. I apologize now. It might be a little overwhelming. But this is the goodbye song, or Isale. And when I was there, I wasn't recording. I didn't want to be rude and just whip out my phone when they'd sing this to me, so I am borrowing this from from YouTube, just so that you know. But I want you to hear this song because this is the song that will haunt you in your dreams after you leave. how beautiful it is. And with that, I'll open it up. Any questions? Well, thank you. I'm going to get the lights. I'm sorry. Question, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Fiji is still a British colony or British?
Not anymore. Mm-hmm. As of the 1980s, they've kind of taken their ties away, and it's now entirely in the hands of the Fijian government. So they have a constitution that incorporates all of the various faiths and cultures that are already there to make sure that it's respectful of them. Yeah.
Do they have an indigenous religion?
They did. It's pretty much gone for the most part, but there are still elements of it, and I'm hoping to do a little extra digging on that piece because religion is one of my passions. But there are still traditional healers. It's hard to find ones that aren't trying to perform for tourists, but they do exist. They're still out there in more of the farther regions of Fiji. Mm-hmm. Question?
They're considered Melanesians, correct?
Mm-hmm.
The map seemed to indicate that they graded up to Polynesia. Were the Polynesians derived from the Melanesians?
Not from the Melanesians. So as far as I've read, and as far as I'm aware that we know right now, the Melanesians came after the Lopita. So what was on that map were the Lopita people. They were the first ones to kind of colonize all of those regions. The Melanesians came after and interbred with many of them. But to my knowledge, they did not make it to the Hawaiian Islands.
So how did you get connected to Fiji? How did you start to be interested?
Well, it wasn't really where I was planning on working. I've done most of my work in the Caribbean, but we have a provost at CCC, Dr. Dudley Gardner, who's done a lot of work in Fiji, has a lot of connections, and his friend from the Fiji Museum, who happens to be a Ratu in his own right, and he's the director of the archaeology department at the museum, came and we met, hit it off, and started talking about different ways that we could bring our students out there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, the song at the end was Western scales, Western harmony. Is there anything left from the original? Like if it was Chinese, it was different scale,
Right.
different harmony.
Mm-hmm.
Is that left over from the missionaries?
There's a good possibility that it has been affected by that. The missionaries started coming in the late 1600s. It took about 100 years for them to really not to survive visiting Fiji, maybe even a little more than 100 years, but they definitely had an influence. And the majority of the population is very much Methodist and Catholic, and so you would hear that the effects of that kind of blending of music and sounds. Mm-hmm.
Another language.
Mm-hmm. We're working on learning it. That's what we're going to be doing. Yes, yes. So each group is fluent in their own native tongue. Also, the main language of the land is English. So most people are at least bilingual, though in varying degrees. The farther out you go into the islands, the more trouble people have with English. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you do hear the indigenous languages predominantly. Mm-hmm. Christine?
How many students are you hoping to take with you on these trips?
Well, ideally we'll get up to about 12. It would be really fun to have that number. I'm bringing a very small group this summer. We're just going to jump in while we're not even quite ready yet, but we're going to see how it goes and do some of the more detailed work that the museum is looking for us to do, as well as some visits to villages, but not the full excursion. That will be next summer, not this summer, the next one, in 2019. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Since tourism is banned in Fiji, why are some indigenous Fiji villages in such poor state?
Well, they're in that state because of the storms a lot, but also because they want to live in the traditional manner, the traditional styles. So while they've had a lot of influence from Christianity, And that really influences a lot of the architecture as well. It depends on what materials they have available. It's pretty expensive to get materials out to the farther reaches of the islands, and that's why you see some of the difference in the building technique. The mainland, where you have access to the cities and you have people with jobs, regular jobs, whereas on the outer islands, not as much. So poverty is pretty high the farther you go. I saw another thing. Yeah. How long did what go? Oh, the whole trip? Well, this year we're going to be out there for a little over 2 weeks. And that's going to be the goal. We'll spend 1 week visiting the mainland and then 1 week living in the villages, learning the language, working in the fields, that sort of thing. Good question.
You said not to drink the water in the cities. Why is that?
It's just not highly filtered, and so there is a lot of pollution in the cities, but bottled Fiji water is everywhere, so you can definitely buy some. You'll be fine. It's just because of the sewage systems that it's not recommended. Various diseases and stuff are more likely in the cities, as well as dengue. I don't know. I didn't talk about dengue fever, but that is a factor in the cities from mosquitoes. So, yeah. Just in the cities, though. Yep.
You were showing some of the earlier weapons at the museum.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the earlier tribes were warring for locations on the island? Because it's not a large place.
Right. I would say partially for locations, but I would say more so just power.
Just power.
Power, respect, trying to get more of the whale's teeth to be in control of larger areas. Yeah, a little bit of, a little bit of everything. And just because, food. Because there are some areas where there were almost sacred contracts between various villages where this village was allowed to fish this particular type of fish and this village was not allowed to. They could only harvest certain plants, and so they would have an exchange. And if relationships got a little tense, we would see a lot of that too. Yeah. But there was always that exchange for women too, so you didn't have to go that route. Yes.
One of my passions is food.
Mine too.
What would be a typical meal?
Oh my gosh, we ate so good. There's a lot of cassava. Papaya grows everywhere. Mangoes grow everywhere. I didn't point out, I can actually show you, there's breadfruit, which I don't find that it tastes like bread. It tastes to me more like potatoes. But they deep fry them and they can make all sorts of different things from breadfruit. What else? Lots of fruit, coconuts everywhere. Yeah, it's good food. And then because you have the diversity of cultures there, some of the best Indian food I've ever had, some of the best Chinese food, it's all over. So it's pretty diverse. But as you're out on the villages, it's a lot more of the traditional influence. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I noticed they were talking about, they're very well spoken about the sustainability and about the trees.
Mm-hmm.
Do they talk about like plastic particles and the fish being poisoned?
Ah, the plastic particles in the fish. That's a huge issue for us right now, huh?
You think that is?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that I'm hoping I can work more toward when we go this summer, because everywhere you go, you see plastic everywhere. There's no recycling centers. So that is a huge issue. When we were traveling out to Kadavu, I mean, you would just see, because you have no sanitation company at all, so you would see areas where things are just dumped. And then, of course, if you're in a highly volatile area where hurricanes happen frequently, where else is that stuff going to go? So it's not so much that they don't care about it, it's just the infrastructure is not there. Greenpeace has an organization, a very large organization in Suva, and I'm hoping that we can work with them to maybe booster some projects with that in mind. Oh yes, they're very concerned with the sea level rising, with the effects of the powerful storms coming through. because while they don't expect as many storms, scientists are saying that there might be fewer storms, but they're going to be significantly more powerful in response to climate change. So there is a lot of fear. And actually there was a young boy who presented just a few months ago at the United Nations expressing his concern for climate change and that we need to, because his whole village was wiped out and they were on the northern shore of Viti Levu. So it is definitely a concern, and they're looking for any help that could be provided for that. Mm-hmm.
You had said that we'll definitely experience the effects of climate change more so this summer. Why would that be?
I just imagine it's going to be hot because we didn't have much of a winter. I don't know. I'm just shooting that out there. I really don't know for sure. But I would imagine one report that I saw recently was just saying to expect more days above 90 degrees here in Flagstaff this summer. We'll see what actually happens, but that was just something that I've seen recently. Yeah, it's going to get hot. You had a question too? How is the communication between the different cultures? It varies. It depends on where you are. They'll tell you that, yeah. They'll say that they get along just fine. There's a large Muslim population. There's a large Buddhist population. These are growing. You always have a little tension, I think, but generally they get along from what I've seen. You know, I asked everyone everywhere I went, how are things? How are things between these groups? And they were like, oh, things have never been better. You know, there's a lot less strife, there's a lot less racism, there's a lot less of those concepts that we have a tendency of expecting to see. Mm-hmm.
Would there be less social classes?
Fewer social classes? I would say so for now. We'll see what the effects of globalization have in store. Definitely you see classes in the cities a little bit more, but predominantly where you go, everyone kind of lives the same unless they're in government. So, yeah, it seems to be a bit more egalitarian though, very patriarchal at the same time. Good question. Any other questions? Yeah. Oops, sorry.
Being that you're saying that it's such a patriarchal society, traveling alone with your daughter, how was that received? You know, being a strong individual, also female.
Yep. Thank God I had kava. It was good that I had kava, definitely. They knew that I was going to make sevu sevu. They knew I was in contact with the Ratus, but I was asked a lot of questions about traveling alone. And in one of the villages that I stayed with, I was talking to the women there, and they're like, so where's your husband? Everyone wanted to know, where's your husband? Where's your husband? Oh, he's working, huh? Mm-hmm. There was this, you know, I don't know if I can really trust that answer. But in this one village I asked, so what is it like for women who travel? And they're like, oh no, we don't do that. We don't travel alone. And they were asking me my age and wanted to make sure I was married because they were going to hook me up if I wasn't. So they were concerned, but other than that, there were no troubles. They actually, it felt like they took extra care of us because they saw I was with a child and wanted to make sure that we were safe. And so at one bus stop, there was an individual who was drunk and just having a fit, and I was driven to another one. They was like, no, we're not going to leave you here. Let's just go over to this other bus stop. And so they were very protective of us, which I appreciated. Yeah. You had a question too?
Well, it was a fishing culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Originally, and it still is, I guess, at some level.
Yes.
But you also mentioned about the waters around there being dangerous. So how did they handle it? Or
I never saw anyone particularly concerned with it. They just knew what to look out for.
and what do they have to look out for?
I was freaking out though. There are scorpions in the forests. In the water you have jellyfish where they're so small you can't see them. But if they sting you, you have about the length of time of smoking a cigarette before you'll die. Poisonous octopus, they have Don't worry, I put the book together to protect us when we go. I know it all now. But they've got different types of octopus, shellfish that if you accidentally pick them up, they have a stinger that comes out that can kill you. There's a lot to look out for. But everywhere we went, they're like, oh, just don't go over to that side. You know, the rockfish are over there. Just stay over here. And, you know, I saw plenty of kids just walking even in Suva, in the big city where you really can't swim because the water's much more polluted. You still see kids walking around without shoes on and catching fish and goofing off in the water. So, yeah. I guess if you grow up around it, you just know what to expect more. So, but yes, I put together a whole do not touch booklet for our students so that they know what to watch out for and how to protect themselves if they do get stung. So, any other questions that I can answer for you?
Did you experience any sickness or get ill?
My daughter did, but it went really quick. It was a high fever overnight, and then it was pretty much gone within a day. Thank goodness. I blame the flight, honestly, because of that recycled air. I don't know. I always get sick off planes, so that's what I think.
How long is that flight?
19 hours.
All right.
19 hours. And that's not including any flights to LA. That's just from LA.
I figured, yeah.
But it's great because in the airport in Fiji, when you're waiting for your flight back, there are beds that you can just sleep on. So you can just have a nap in the airport. Yeah. Any other questions? I highly recommend it. Even if you don't want to go, help support our students and help spread the word. It's a wonderful opportunity. They're getting such a connection with museum studies, with anthropology, with cultural preservation. We'll be working directly with the government. So I highly recommend it. But I'm biased, I'll admit it. Any other questions?
Yeah. More of a comment. Because I almost contacted you after I got to NAU. And everybody's, field schools. And I'm like, crap, we didn't do or talk about any of this when I was at CCC. So I'm really happy to see this going on.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the first one. We're also working on one in Costa Rica for Spanish. So we're pushing in the right direction, I think. And it'll be, because we're CCC, it's going to be open to anyone who would like to take this as a class, as opposed to NAU where you need to be degree seeking specifically. So it provides a unique opportunity, I think. Thank you. Yeah, question? Well, I'm taking just a couple out this summer, but generally we'll be leaving here the end of June and coming back the early July, kind of in that window. That's when all the fun cultural events and parties happen at the museum. So we're going to be there to help with those. You want to come? Nice. Awesome.
How do you find out about schedule and fees?
It's not official yet, but I'm working on it. So absolutely, I'll have my business card up here. Anyone's welcome to contact me. Maybe you and I can just run out there, for a quick visit or something. It'd be great. Any other questions? Sure. One for sure.
Maybe two?
Maybe two, maybe
it's like
three.
75-25 right now for
I don't
going.
know.
So.
Where's your mom? Where'd she go? No, I'm just kidding.
She had to go pick up my dad.
We'll see. Well, thank you all so much for coming and listening to me and putting up with me. Thank you.